I'm going to go ahead and get us started today. My name is Jason Rupp. I'm the president of Southeast Life Sciences, and I want to welcome everybody. Today we have a great event planned, both this morning with the SE Color pitch event, as well as this afternoon with the Women at Southeast Life Sciences event. So I appreciate everybody for starting to come in. Just a real quick background on Southeast Color, if you're not familiar with what we're doing. We launched this last year with Cornelius and Jane, who are both here with us right now, with a couple of missions. One is which is what we're trying to address today, trying to give access to small companies that are looking for funding, level the playing field of access to investors and to potential partners. So today we're featuring 8 companies in this pitch event, and with the winner receiving a $10,000 prize. Beyond that mission, we've been engaged this year and will continue throughout the year of encouraging vaccinations, encouraging minorities to participate in clinical trials. We had a webinar a few months ago with a pastor and a scientist and a doctor who's involved in clinical research to discuss the issues and the distrust and what we can do to improve things. And then this fall, we're planning to do some more with clergy and really try to build the information and knowledge of the clergy as they work with their congregations. And then later in the fall, in October, as part of the annual conference in Charleston on the October 27th through the 29th, we'll also have a reception for Southeast Color, as well as we're working on either some programming or a nice lounge sponsored by SE Color. So more information will be coming out about that through the summer. So with that background, I'd like to turn the time over to Jane Morgan, who is our co-chair of Southeast Life Sciences and also one of the founding board members of Southeast Color. Jane.
Thank you, Jason, and welcome everyone. We are so happy to have everybody here today. This is our inaugural event, and we are kicking it off this year. We have focused almost exclusively in this inaugural year on the recruitment of minorities into clinical trials, the importance of that and what that means, not just for populations that are Black and brown, but also what that means really for the nation and ultimately for the world. We want to develop drugs, devices, vaccines that are relevant to everyone, but we also want people to be able to have confidence in this drug development process, including physicians as they are prescribing these different medications. So that's been one of the focuses that we've had. As we continue to grow, we're going to continue to morph into our parent company, Southeast Life Sciences, where we are looking to engage all communities at a higher level. We want to be able to capture venture capital, provide opportunities, and really provide breadth and scope to all ideas and all opportunities. So we welcome you today to Southeast Color. We have a great opening fireside chat with Mel Ivarsson, and I am going to introduce her now. When you talk about Mel, you really talk about a woman, a phenomenal woman who has had quite a courageous journey. And so we'll hear today a bit about how she came to this journey and how she came to be focused on health equity. We call her Mel. Her name is Melanie Ivarsson. Currently is the Senior Vice President and Chief Development Officer for Moderna. And obviously Moderna is very much front of mind of everyone in the last year and a half. And she's been in this role for the last year and a half during almost really this entire pandemic. So she has a wealth of knowledge and information of how we got to where we are and what that means for all communities. And I think certainly Moderna has done a great job in the recruitment of populations of color into their COVID trials. Prior to that, she was the head of global clinical operations for Takeda. And also spent time as a head of clinical programs for Shire and the head of clinical programs for Pfizer. So here's someone with a background, both Pfizer and Moderna, that we see in the news today. Spent quite a few years, almost a decade really, at Pfizer as well, and then brings that knowledge to Moderna to continue to develop a multitude of programs and platforms. Moderna is not just about COVID. And so we welcome her today. We welcome her focus on health equity as we have our inaugural event. So Mel, we want to welcome you. Thank you very much for coming. And
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And really, we just would like to start to sort of talk about your journey, your journey to Moderna. How does that start? Where were you born? How did you grow up? How did you end up at Moderna in the middle of a pandemic? Maybe kind of walk us through what it's like to be you then, today, and in the future. Yes.
All right. So my journey to Moderna was an unintentional one. Let's put it that way. I certainly didn't go and join Moderna knowing what was about to happen. But if I start at the beginning, and Jane, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to come and talk to this forum. You know, Jane and I have really worked together alongside each other last year through the development of the vaccine and the topic of health equities. And Jane has been so instrumental in my education and the education of others at Moderna. And it's wonderful to have the opportunity to come and talk to a group of people that are so close to your heart. And this is so important to you as part of everything we're trying to do. So I grew up just outside London, you can probably tell from the accent, and neither of my parents had actually gone to university, and both had grown up in London during World War II. And so that sort of gives you a slightly different perspective on life. My mother was actually evacuated during the war up to the north of England because nobody was interested in sort of bombing that part of the country. But my father actually stayed in London and through the Blitz, being bombed night after night after night through the Blitz. And I am very aware of the fact that for them, education was a luxury. Neither of them had the opportunity to go to university because after World War II, the country went into a period of depression and deprivation for nearly 2 decades. There was food rationing as the country was rebuilt, and everybody had to basically get around what to do to rebuild the country. And so for my parents, there was no opportunity to go to college. In fact, they were both quite vague about whether they even finished high school. I'm not entirely sure, but they were both incredibly intelligent. And for my mother in particular, who was born in 1934, it was a case of, well, education's wasted on a girl. Why would we do that? You will leave your home, be married, and live as a wife and mother, and that is what you will do. And they, coming from that background, they were absolutely adamant that that wouldn't happen to me. And so I was born in the 70s. Education wasn't a luxury to them, it was an absolute must. And I'm so grateful to them because what they did is they sent me to actually a girls' school in London. It was one of the oldest girls' schools in England. It was founded in 1711, which really prided itself on allowing women to sort of follow their dreams and do whatever was right for them. Our headmistress was a science teacher with a PhD who built a science block, and I probably credit that with actually the start of my journey. My father went bankrupt about twice, but they never sacrificed my education. We pretty much sacrificed everything else, but they never sacrificed education. I am very, very lucky that I was able to get from a family that was primarily uneducated and move on to that college educated ladder. And that is entirely down to the sacrifices that they made for me. So I'm very fortunate. I moved to university in the UK and I did my physiology degree. And then I was in my 3rd year of my degree and doing a research project when the supervisor came to me and said, have you ever considered a PhD? And I was like, what, who, me? No, why would I? Why me? What? No, it's big enough coming to university. And he was like, you've got a good analytical mind. You should come and do a PhD with me. And I did a PhD in neuroelectrophysiology, which is a very focused on the brain and how the brain works. Had an absolutely lovely time. Really loved my PhD. Very male-dominated part of science. The conference where I met my husband, I can tell you there were 4 women and 125 men at that conference, and that was very normal. And so, I'm trying to build a picture of how things have changed with each generation. That, you go from education being a luxury to, well, I'm now in the room, but I'm really outnumbered here. To sort of where we are today. So I finished my PhD, moved into the industry, worked my way, as you did my bio, very beautifully there, much better than I could. And then went back to school after I'd had my kids and did an executive MBA at MIT, which I finished a few years ago. And at that point, I was thinking about what was the next challenge in my career to take on. And Moderna reached out to me and said, we're building our organization. We need somebody with your experience. Come build it with us. And that seemed like a fabulous opportunity. And I turned up in February of last year, was greeted by the chief medical officer, who gave me a big hug and said, we've got this side project called a COVID-19 vaccine, but you're to have nothing to do with it. We're just doing this as a side project. Don't worry, it's not going to consume the company. How wrong were we? 3 weeks later, it was, we're going to do this. So we're going to co-develop this vaccine with the US government, with the NIH, and we were full steam ahead. And ever since, it's been the most incredible experience, as you know, Jane, developing that vaccine and trying to do it the right way, which I think is what we're going to, talk a little bit about today and how we did that.
And so it's interesting, you sort of glossed over really quickly. I don't know if people heard, her MBA was from MIT, so not a small MBA. So that was very impressive, and very impressive to understand really, kind of your humble beginnings and the importance of family and structure. And I think that's what we're also trying to provide here at SE Color, that the ability to have some structure and people focused on you and people believing in you and putting you in the right place. And that's exactly what you've described in your experience growing up there in London. And so you get to Moderna, they've recruited you for something. No one is talking about a pandemic, and suddenly in 3 weeks, you're the chief development officer and you're sort of in charge of a pandemic that really caught us unaware. And so what was that like in those early first weeks as you all began to have an awareness that this is something serious, is coming really quickly, and we maybe have the ability to impact lives really here, to impact the, as you know, there's been so much death and morbidity, and that, we have the ability to really stem that tide. When did you guys begin to understand that this is a race? We are now in a race, and this is real, and our side project has now become our focus, and it's going to be all hands on deck.
It was very much that. I think we realized it all went so fast, to be honest, Jane. I think we've only just realized what we managed to do last year in the last few months. We've kind of taken a breath. When you're in it, the incredible thing was the intense amount of collaboration between all the functions involved. Moderna had never run a large-scale clinical trial before. The great thing about, one of the only positive things about COVID-19 is the world's become educated on drug development and vaccine development, and everybody now knows what a phase 3 clinical trial is. But Moderna had never done one. They'd done a handful of clinical trials, and they didn't have the infrastructure or the setup to really run large trials. And that was part of why I was there, to help build that with them.
So were they really still sort of at a startup phase, or bigger than a startup, more of a mature startup? Or
it was actually quite funny, because when I was looking at Moderna and I was sort of saying to my husband, he was very kind of like, well, they've been going for 10 years and I think they're amazing, but they just need that one thing to happen. What would Moderna do? And it turned out that COVID-19 was, that pandemic response was what Moderna could do well.
So they were still supported by the venture capital funding, by funding, and
absolutely
very much
yes,
so, which is what
it had all
been here.
Yes, investors believing in the technology, which was unproven. So that's an incredible leap of faith. believing in something that we'd run a few clinical experiments, we'd done some work in oncology, we'd done some work in infectious disease, and we're just moving into rare, and knew that it would be a long, slow trajectory to come. And, you know, once you move into clinical development, these are very expensive investments. And one of the things that happened through COVID was the support given to companies to allow them to actually scale up manufacturing and to do as many things in parallel as possible. So the vaccine was developed in a very standard way, a phase 1, a phase 2, and a phase 3 trial, but everything was sped up because rather than waiting to make decisions around, okay, we've got this data, now let's go and manufacture the next dose, we've got this data, now let's go and build a manufacturing plant, we were able to make all those decisions at risk. We didn't progress until we had all the safety information. So no human, you know, the human safety was absolutely done as standard, but the investment was there from the very beginning. And having that investment allows you to make different decisions and make different choices, as we all know. And that's why we could all move so quickly.
Yeah, you know, this is the first that I heard that you all didn't even have manufacturing set up. So you literally had to build a manufacturing capability.
We had
to be on the stage with Pfizer is incredible, where Pfizer is a complete dominant machine, and here you all are, you don't even have manufacturing capability.
We had small scale manufacturing for clinical trial material, but we didn't have a manufacturing plant that would deliver hundreds of millions of doses in that time scale. And so one of the challenges for vaccines, and one of the reasons they're so expensive to develop, is you need to go and build very unique manufacturing capability for each vaccine. And it's and so that was one of the things we needed to get going on, and that can take years. And you're right, some of the other large companies that are in this with us in this incredible you know, sort of situation of vaccines would be part of the solution, is that they already had existing plants and had large manufacturing capability. And so what was so unique about Moderna is we literally had a blank sheet of paper for everything. The way we'd run that trial, the way we would be able to manufacture the vaccine, everything we were going to do, we were doing for the first time in the middle of a pandemic.
Right. Very much a startup. So, you know, we make diamonds. Diamonds are forged really with pressure. And so very much a startup where you're wearing multiple hats. As you say, the slate is completely blank, and people have to lean in and sort of make it work and bring their ingenuity, bring their skills, bring their knowledge to the table and really compete. And, you know, that's what we see as well. I think that's a great example in a startup world is, you know, how do you get your foot in the door? How do you really compete when it's you and maybe just 2 or 3 or a few other people? And literally you need to work to bring your product to market. Now, most people won't have to do that under pandemic circumstances, which is another layer of pressure. But I think that's a great example. You know,
you touched, if I may, on a really important point around how do you bring things forward. One of the advantages I reflect now is we were actually a very small team of people who could work incredibly collaboratively together. We didn't have everything that the other big companies had, but we had a very brilliant idea. And we had very dedicated, very passionate people. Some of the larger companies, you know, I've done sort of other sort of speaking panels with them, and they've talked about the hundreds or even thousands of people that they were able to bring in from other parts of the organization to dedicate. We were a team of about 24 people on the clinical development side. We worked hand in hand in a way I never have before, but it was actually the way we partnered with others outside. We recognized what expertise we had and what we did not have. And then we went and sought it out and listened to experts and worked with other companies that we could partner with, such as CROs, such as health equity experts like yourself, to sort of to educate us and to sort of get what we needed. And that sort of ability, that willingness to go and collaborate and bring in and to listen, I think was one of our strengths during last year. We didn't have all the answers. We hadn't done this before. We had to go and seek out other expertise. And I think that's very much part of the sort of the startup mentality that you need to have of what do I bring to the table? What can I do really well? And where do I need to go and seek out other expert voices that can help me get to the next stage of this?
Mm-hmm. You know, you and I both sort of share this passion about, diversity in clinical trials and why it's important. Maybe you could talk with us a little bit about, how you affect change within Moderna, how you came to sort of that realization, that recognition that this is something that you really want to lean into, that health equity is important, and that clinical trials maybe are also a tool that people don't often think of that's a part of health equity. Talk to us a bit about that journey and that mindset and your influence within Moderna in moving that forward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, COVID-19 highlighted the disproportionate impact on communities of color. So it wasn't something we even had to think about, should we or should we not do. It was essential that any clinical research that was conducted represented the population impacted. You're developing a vaccine that everyone in the world's going to want to be able to take. But you've also got,
that is a new concept. That's a novel concept.
It is a novel concept, isn't it, Jane?
That's not the way medicine is done here. No, it's not.
It's
not.
That
was very novel.
It's very novel. And, there's a lot of data. It wasn't that long ago that 95% of clinical trial participants were Caucasian.
That's right.
The US. And,
I think that was last year. That was not that long ago.
It's not that long ago. I like to think we're moving the needle a little bit, but you're absolutely right. It isn't that long ago. And the problem is, as you very well know, there is, and it's something that many of my colleagues in the industry, and we are all actively discussing, is the entire infrastructure is set up around universities and institutions that it basically primarily select Caucasians for research.
Right.
They're not in diversity-rich communities. There is no access. Information is not being shared. Even if people from different communities wanted to partake in a trial, it is not easy for them to find information or to be educated. And there has been virtually no outreach attempting to educate and inform people and give them those options because they just haven't lived in the right area or had access. And, you and I have also talked about people want to be treated by people they trust and who look like them or can talk to them about the issues that are important to them. And so as an industry, we need to be selecting clinical trialists to work with us that have come from diverse backgrounds themselves, live in different parts of the country, in different systems that have access to different communities. So one of the things that we knew when we started running the COVE trial, which is the COVID-19 vaccine Moderna trial, is we had to triangulate three things. We had to go and find sites that could go and run phase 3 clinical research to the highest possible quality at the pace we needed them to. So these had to be large, experienced sites. Right. So that limited us in the first place. We then had to we were following the pandemic. And because it was a case-driven study, we needed to know once people had been vaccinated, we would start to count the COVID cases. Where was that pandemic coming? And we predicted it would light up in the middle of the country, which it did. And then thirdly, really important to us, and these aren't in any priority list, these are just the 3 points. We wanted to go and find sites that were in areas where there was a diversity, rich community that could be given the opportunity to come into the research. Those 3 things were pretty hard to do when you had literally days and weeks to make those decisions in a pandemic.
And there's no precedence for it.
And there's no precedence because so everyone's skeptical. Of course they are, because you're suddenly coming along going, come be in our clinical trial. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? Why would I want to do that?
And you would not be sort of the traditional person that we might think of as leading health equity. So that might be also different. We have a voice coming from a different type of face talking about health equity. And does that make it easier for you, I think, to get in the room and to influence? Does that make it more difficult because people think, well, she can't really relate or really understand? Or does that make it, how do you position yourself in an area where people may not think, oh, what is Mel doing in health equity? And yet you have moved the needle and are in the process of swinging that pendulum. So you have come out swinging and done a great job, and you have been an integral part of an industry shift as well, and yet maybe from an unlikely source.
So I think I hope that people give me a chance. I've had to be educated myself around many of the issues and the topics that have created the distrust. It wasn't something that I, had enormous knowledge of, and I'm very grateful to those that have educated me. And I've tried to be very open-minded and seek out that information. But I think I'm in that position. I happen to be in a position right now where I can influence what's going on inside the organization, having those conversations with my senior leaders because I am there. That's the seat I have at the table right now. And then work with experts like yourself and others that can help us navigate the right approaches. And it's all about listening. I never think I'm the smartest person in the room, but I'm quite good at working out who is and giving them a voice. And, and then carrying that message back and forth and trying to do what was right. Everybody, a lot of people will know that what we did for our trial is we started off and we realized that our Caucasian enrollment was going much faster than any other community of color. And we made the unprecedented decision 5 weeks into our trial to actually stop all Caucasian enrollment. You might think that when you're in the middle of a global pandemic, trying to develop a vaccine as quickly as possible, to sit down with your senior leadership and say, let's turn off Caucasian enrollment, it's the right thing to do, and make sure that there is a spot for Black and brown people to come into this trial. That is the right thing to do. You might imagine there'd be pushback, but actually there wasn't. And that's one of the things I love about Moderna. Everybody knew that was the right thing to do. Where they had enormous faith in me and the team is that was the right way to do it. Right. They knew that the end result had to be right. Was that the right way to do it? We looked at lots of different scenarios and we genuinely believe that was the right way to do it. And it was very successful. It took a few weeks to sort of to turn the ship, but with an enormous amount of effort, outreach into different communities, different kinds of materials, working with our investigators, providing them with different data, providing them with different ways of doing community outreach, all the support that we could give and that they gave each other. We ended up with a trial that was representative of the population of the US, and something we're all very, very proud of. But we're not going to stop there, right? Moderna's never going to look back. We have already publicly given the targets or the goals for the in recruitment for our next phase 3 trial, which is in cytomegalovirus. And we will continue to be very bold and very transparent with society about what we're trying to do. And we won't always be successful, I know that, but we're going to go out showing everybody what we're going to try and do. We've slowed a trial down once, we'll do it again. And let's go and be trailblazers in the industry. You don't have to be one of the big giants to actually be the one that changes the way we do this. It just turns out that, Moderna, that wasn't a difficult thing to convince people about. Everybody knew it was the right thing to do, and we absolutely want to lead the way.
So early on, my impression, and obviously I was sort of on the outside looking, was that Moderna was really probably best positioned to be first to market when we started the pandemic. And so I'm wondering if you can give some insight, and you can tell me whether I'm right or wrong, with regard to your conversation, with your CEO, that we need to stop and really cap the enrollment of whites, which slows the trial down, which pushes back really the last patient in, and maybe then impacted you coming to market second after Pfizer, where you were originally positioned to come first. I mean, that's a huge risk for a small company coming up against a big giant. That coveted position of first to market would have to be sacrificed to increase minority enrollment. I mean, how do you convince the CEO that that's the right thing to do?
It's an interesting thing that under an EUA, first to market is still important, but the most important thing was to do the right study and that was the most important thing. And, you know, we didn't have a conversation about what the impact would be on sort of first or second to market. The way Pfizer had designed their study and the way we were all counting cases meant that anything could happen to any of us. And nobody actually expected the efficacy to be so high, because no one had run a trial like this with an mRNA vaccine before. No one was expecting 95%. So the way our studies were actually constructed, that first interim analysis, we might not have actually met the threshold for efficacy. And the conversation really was, we're developing a vaccine for everybody, and everyone has to be able to trust this data. And that became the most important thing. We ended up, our EUA got approved a week later, and we were able to do quite a lot around the way we brought our data in on an ongoing basis, and we were very, very efficient. But actually doing the right trial was just the most important thing. That's one of the things I admire most about our leadership, is doing the right thing was just the most important thing. That really was how the conversation went.
Yeah, I think it's incredible that you led that, and you've created such change, and even the beginning of a revolution. And people may or may not know, I have championed sort of this cause for years, and it's interesting that a pandemic actually begins to bring it more to light when people can see it right in front of them and begin to understand that. And I think, Mel, you've been very critical, because people understand, even when I go out now to speak and to address vaccine hesitancy, I have real data, and I have real data on different types of people and different populations of people. So I don't need to talk to people about suppositions or extrapolations. I can actually talk about the data. And that has been so compelling and so influential in talks that I have, when people understand that people that look like them, not only were in the trials, but we've got data on you. And this is what the data shows. So those are the kinds of questions that I get when people say, well, how do I know how is it going to affect me? How do I know what side effects I'm going to have? So I think, when we talk about data, it's irrefutable. The data is what the data is. And so I think, you are underselling yourself in the impact that you've had in moving this needle. And it takes sometimes, I've been a small voice, other people have been small voices along the way, but we have a pandemic. And then we have companies that are, right in the glaring spotlight, begin to also lean in and move this needle. And then people start to listen and understand, oh, what is this that they're talking about with clinical trials? And certainly in our populations, we've been reticent to be involved in clinical trials because of all the heinous acts that have been committed against us in the name of advancing science and research. And here we are now saying, hey, please step up and be involved in clinical trials, because these clinical trials really are a gateway to improving your health and narrowing the gap in health equity. And I think you've been, very effective and very impactful in doing that for an industry, dare I say, for a nation, dare I say, for the world. Moderna's on a world stage,
Yeah,
that's it.
I would agree with you. It is. It was at the right moment to do something like this, and it's in something that we want to continue to build, that sense of a Moderna community. People taking control of their own health, understanding what's happening to them, being educated and informed is so very important, and it's something that we think is really important at Moderna. And so we'll be building out a lot of that, as we continue to build on our vaccine portfolio. You will expect to see more from us about that, giving people the opportunity to be informed. I just want people to feel informed and work out, is this the right thing for me and my family? And one of the things we do know is that it can be really hard for people within a community where there is distrust, for one person to take that leap and go and consider a clinical trial. But then they often will become a change agent. They'll talk to members of their family and members of their community. And if we can just give somebody the right tools to have that conversation, to ensure that their family members become informed. I mean, cytomegalovirus is one of the leading causes of congenital defect in newborn babies in the US. And yet very few women when they're pregnant even know about it. So just starting to inform people about it is going to be so important. And then giving them the opportunity to learn about research and what's being done. That's just something that we should be doing. Now, there is, again, a disproportionate impact on communities of color with CMV. And so we're not going to go and run that study at a bunch of hospitals which have a proportionately wide catchment area. We're finding the sites where we can really go out into the community and educate and inform people and give them the opportunity to make a decision for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cytomegalovirus is going to be, an interesting area and a very important area for Moderna to go into, because very similar to clinical trial participation for African Americans and other populations of color, it will have to be preceded by education. First, people will have to even learn that there's an issue and why there's an issue before this sort of an unmet need is addressed. And so, that's a position that companies often find themselves in. You find yourselves in the position of being educators and informers. And I think that's something that we don't often think about as we're building our companies. Oftentimes, we have great ideas, we have novel ideas, and those ideas can be hard concepts for other people to think about when they haven't thought about it in that way. And our whole organization is built around sort of, looking at the triangle from the back instead of from the front, and determining why that's important to do so. So I think that's really great as we sort of bring this entire ecosystem together. Moderna is such a great example of that. Yeah. So one of the things that I would like to ask you, Moderna sort of encapsulates a huge success, right? A startup success. And we know most startups really have a success rate of 10% or less. Everybody doesn't make it. In fact, most don't make it. And yet Moderna has been so successful. It represents everything that we do here at SE Color and at Southeast Life Sciences, and bringing the entire ecosystem together with our academics and our venture capitalists, our inventors, our business people, that infrastructure. How do we have funding sources? So when you think about that, and you know that there are people here who are watching and who will view it later, who are hungry, who would like to move it forward, who've been going in circles, who are looking to get investors at the table, how would you advise them? What would you say, especially from your experience at Moderna?
Well, the Moderna story, I think, is an example of resilience. I mean, the company had been in existence for 10 years before COVID happened. And if COVID hadn't happened, as I explained earlier, it would have continued to be probably a very slow trajectory. The growth we've experienced in the last year is because of that one opportunity that came along that nobody was planning for or expecting to happen, that the company could really meet the needs of the world. The incredible decision was the one that was made in January by our CEO, who said, let's get involved in finding a vaccine for this pandemic. Mm-hmm. So I think, for the startups, that boldness, we pride ourselves on being prepared to make very bold decisions. And we're also very relentless in the way we pursue them. There have been some, this would be a really good example of where you take that opportunity and you go, I mean, who would think we could do that? We didn't have anything that was needed, but we did it. And look what we did as a result of it. Mm-hmm. It was incredible. I can't emphasize enough about the collaboration. One of the things that I really has struck me about Moderna is the going out, and I've talked about it already today, going out and listening to other voices, networking, collaborating, getting other opinions, being humble about what you know and what you don't know, and going and getting that expertise. And it doesn't matter who you are at Moderna, from our CEO down, this incredibly open-mindedness about going and getting the information that's needed. So that collaborative spirit, constant sort of, asking those questions, what can we do next, the long-term plan, and then grabbing the opportunity when you have it, and really going for it, has been really incredible. But I really can't emphasize the networking enough, because I think that is, it's so easy. And many of my friends who I did my MBA with have gone on to do startups, believing that, you've got everything you need and you've got this right. But actually listening to the experts and the people that can really support you, I think, is really important.
Right. I think that's an incredible message, that there has to be collaboration, no matter how great your idea is or your concept or your model. It's going to be impossible to bring it really to light of day on your own, and that you're going to need support. And that support, oftentimes, the same as clinical trials, hasn't necessarily gone to people of color. And we've had a hard time getting our foot in the door, or even having venture capitalists or other investors really believe in us. Because investors are sort of people too, and they come from their environments, and they're accustomed to investing in people that look like them and come from their environments. And so there's this bridge that has to be covered. And I stop short of saying that there's not trust, but I think what happens is investors tend to invest in places where they feel comfortable and they have confidence. And oftentimes, if you haven't had exposure to other types of people, then it's not an area in which you feel confident or comfortable. And it may be something that is implicit within you, and you don't realize why it is that you are selecting or deselecting certain projects. Yep. And so we are here to really begin to kind of support that infrastructure and to normalize inventions, intelligence, ability across the board, and to level that playing field and to say, this is a normal environment. This is something that you should see as being equitable to anything else, even though this may not be from your culture or something that you are accustomed to. We need to begin to look at it in a different way. Certainly, if any area can be colorblind, technology can certainly be colorblind. And so I think, as we move this forward, that's one of the, auspices of what we're trying to do, and why we bring you in with your whole background and your experience at Moderna, and everybody's at the table, and you all pushed health equity so hard, and you had the highest enrollment of African Americans and Hispanics in your trials. You did those sub-studies. It helps me to go out and give talks, to have real data, and then to have the pleasure of knowing someone like you who really, really, really believes in it and is leaning into it, and got an entire company to turn. And in doing so, really turn the country and maybe even turn the world. And so I think it's an incredibly important story that needs to be told, how we get here and how that begins to really narrow the gap in health equity, and how we need to begin to support people who maybe don't look like you, but are still fellow Americans and have experiences and have ideas and have concepts, and are still looking, as other people are, for that leg up, for that support, because it can't all be done in a vacuum. It's going to require collaboration. And so I think your point on collaboration is just so well taken.
Well, yeah, I mean, you so eloquently said, Jane. That was wonderful. But if I go back to something you were talking about a little bit about implicit bias in the investor environment, it's almost like you want everybody to have implicit bias training. We did experience this in the clinical trial, where some of the sites were saying to us that you know, there were sort of opinions around compliance or use of technology, people's ability according to the community they might come from. And it was like, don't think that's backed up by data.
Right.
And we actually did a lot of implicit bias training with our sites, which was great because we could, when we got this wonderfully diverse population into our trial, we were then able to actually look at compliance, retention, and the utilization of technology and provide real data that shows that, you know, it really doesn't matter. You know, everybody who wants to be in a trial wants to be in a trial and is doing the right thing. And therefore, I just feel we're on the precipice of this changing. That, you know, that everyone's starting to talk about this and starting to look at themselves and how they think and feel, and questioning some of their bias, and maybe, just maybe, this is the start of something really amazing across all these dimensions. You know, we're starting with clinical trials because that's been in the public domain, but investors, community, investment, it would be wonderful to see this continue and to see this dialogue kind of spread out. And I genuinely believe it will be, because I'd love to get, I mean, one of the things we're doing at Moderna is we have a very multi-year plan looking at the diversity of our workforce. So in my organization, for example, it just so happens I have 75% women and 30% from communities of color in my organization. But I'm looking at that because it's important to me that I understand who's interested to come and work at Moderna, and how do I make sure that I am reaching out to people from everywhere who would want the opportunity to come and work at Moderna right now. Internships, interacting with different colleges where, you know, the students have different backgrounds. These are all the kinds of things we're talking about right now. How do we give everybody an opportunity to come and spend some time with Moderna, because we think it's such an amazing place. But, you know, the companies have to, it's not, you know, we're really thinking it through at every level, from our CEO down, over many years. And I'm very proud of the work we're doing. Clinical trials is just one part of what we are trying to do as a company. Looking at our investor profile and, you know, in expectations. I think people need to have expectations to say, show me who you're investing in. Show me who is, you know, how you're thinking through this. Let's break down those barriers and let's build trust in the right places. And if Moderna can, you know, lead the way in some of this, then that's absolutely what we'll do.
And, you know, and ingenuity often comes from different perspectives. For people looking at an object and having 4 conclusions. That's how we breed ingenuity. And all of that comes from, you know, all of our different perspectives and all of our different educational experiences, background experiences, survival experiences. And we bring all of that to the table, and all of that is different for different people. But as we, you know, file patents and move ahead, it's many of the very sort of earth-shattering companies that have become very successful have become successful because the initial idea, the initial premise was from a different perspective. Someone saw something a little bit differently and saw a need ahead of the education, and then had to provide the education for it. And I think we could name, you know, numerous, you know, top Fortune 500 companies, really, that all started from a perspective that, you know, wow, how did they think of that? How many times have we said to ourselves, how did they think of that? That's that different perspective. And I think it's very important, and we have to really, you know, embrace all of that as we move forward. And it's what we're trying to do here at SC Color. We want to bring the investments and match them with really great, sound ideas, and people who need, as you said, that collaboration and that network to move it forward, because it can't be done on our own. And we've left, you know, tragically, so many great ideas sort of on the editing room floor because you just weren't able to find a network to move it forward. And, you know, dare I say, even the world has missed out on great opportunities where There just wasn't an organization like the one that we are starting here to for people to grasp onto and to begin to move forward. So we really appreciate you being here. You know, so what I would like to know as we close, actually, you know, and this is, you know, sort of a pat question, but we always kind of ask it, you know, what do you see as, you know, sort of a couple of questions, maybe a big area of influence as you move forward in health equity, you know, clinical trials. Is there some other area that you can foresee that you need to champion and that you need to move forward? And then also just sort of what's next for you? What are you thinking as far as your growth and development? I mean, here you are the Chief Development Officer. I mean, is there something more? You went to MIT, you've got all your friends who did startups. Is there, you've got that startup bug, is that inside of you as well? So.
I'll take the second question first. I am very happy where I am. I am so excited about our portfolio. And I think we have an opportunity to do something really amazing. One of the things we're looking at the moment is actually how you reinvent clinical development and how you build communities with the participants in your trials, and how you use data in a different way. And so we've got lots of things going on at Moderna right now that really excite me, and you know, we have this amazing portfolio. And then I also have this incredible incubator of brilliant talent and ideas, and this very entrepreneurial spirit all around us, which is wonderful. And I think, you know, clinical trial research has been very traditional, and disrupting it, really disrupting it, making it all about the patients and the participants. Making it accessible to all, people seeing it as an option for them. And, you know, we're going to really look at some of the great, you know, the great sort of public health needs of society in the next few years. And I'm really excited about that. Mm-hmm. I think the other question you were asking me is around, you know, other areas other than clinical trials, right, where that need to be transformed.
Right.
And I think it's funny, actually, I've done a number of investor conferences recently. And I think, you know, this has really tied it all together for me. How money is spent and where it goes. Mm-hmm. That is absolutely, I think, the next sort of is going to be a really key area. There are some significant impacts that COVID-19 have had on our society. Rebuilding right. This is the opportunity to rebuild in the right way. And I love what this group is doing. I think it's absolutely wonderful. It's so inspiring. The support you're giving, the collaboration. I think if people can communicate what they're trying to do in the message and can meet the people where they're at, it's hard for people who may have that bias and not understand it themselves to be brought along. Just as important it is for people to all be given a fair opportunity to be supported and invested in. So I would love to see this space be the next space where it's expected. You know, like we will expect all clinical trials to be representative of the population. I would love to see the investor community take that challenge on as well.
And in closing, you know, is there, you know, any advice? There, you know, there'll be tons of entrepreneurs who will tune into this either today or listen to the recording later. Is there any advice you would give to sort of young entrepreneurs who may feel discouraged, or who may be seeking something, or who may be overly confident? You know, we have both ends of the spectrum. Is there anything that you would think would be good advice from where you're sitting as they begin to kind of move their inventions and move their companies to the next level?
I think we have probably talked more about resilience in the last year than at any other time in recent history. It's been an incredibly difficult year. Mm-hmm. For whether you're a kid who hasn't been able to go to school because it's all remote learning, or you know you've lost your job, or you know, difficulties in the family. We've all learned an incredible amount of resilience. And if you've got through this as an entrepreneur, then I think you probably have bags and bags of resilience. Mm-hmm. And so what I would say is certainly those friends of mine who are going through this right now, it takes a lot longer than you probably realize. There's a very fortunate few who get that amazing kind of startup. But for everybody else, it's that resilience and believing in yourself. Collaboration, finding mentors, finding people who can support you. And then the communication, being able to communicate so that you meet the people where they're at is really important. And I've seen many sort of friends get lost in, but it's such a good idea to me, but I couldn't get anybody else to understand why it was so good. If you can explain mRNA technology so that an entire world will agree to be vaccinated, then you can communicate anything. But I think that's really important as well, as to understand your product and be able to communicate it well to all audiences.
Well, thank you so much, Mel. I appreciate your time that you really have given to us today. I mean, such a wealth of information and knowledge. And I hope people understand really just how special this is to have the Chief Development Officer of Moderna and being so focused on health equity and clinical trials, which is entirely what we're focused on in this first year. So I just want to applaud you privately, publicly, applaud you for the efforts that you're doing, even for my communities. And when I say my communities, not only the African-American community, the medical community, the research community. I'm a member of multiple communities, and you intersect with all of those communities, and you've helped them move that forward. So I want to thank you. It's been special having you here today. And I'm thanking you on behalf of really our parent organization, Southeast Life Sciences, as well as SC Color. So I appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Jane. I think you are so amazing. You are absolutely my hero. And so thank you so much for letting me come along and talk to this group. And I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mel.